To come after your morning headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Treasury is under pressure to bring benefits and pension rises forward to help those struggling with the cost of living. Think tank the Resolution Foundation says that waiting for next April's annual increase will result in more debt for many families. Last night, Rishi Sunak warned of a perfect storm of supply shocks hitting Britain in the coming months. That on the same day, inflation reached a 40-year high. Staying with the rising cost of living, the policing minister has said discretion shouldn't be shown to shoplifters if they're stealing food out of desperation. That's in response to the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, Andy Cook. He suggested police should use their discretion when handling cases involving desperate shoplifters. Kit Malthouse says the law should be applied equally to all. The United Nations is warning that Russia's invasion of Ukraine could soon cause a global food crisis that may last for years. Its Secretary-General says the situation could lead to tens of millions of people facing food insecurity and famine. Antonio Guterres has appealed to Russia to allow the safe and secure export of grain stored in Ukrainian ports. Royal Mail says it'll need to increase its prices and cut costs amid rising inflation. That as it posted a rise in its annual earnings. The firm said it needs to cut costs by more than £350 million. It says it's facing higher wage demands and steeper energy and fuel costs. And archaeologists in England have a new mystery to solve. They've just unearthed a rare stone circle at a prehistoric ritual site in Cornwall. Aerial photos show the long-buried structure resembling a crooked horseshoe. The meaning behind it is still unclear. TV Online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, first today, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said yesterday that a culture change is needed in Westminster. This comes, of course, after a Conservative MP was bailed pending investigation into historic allegations of sexual assault, including rape. Well, Liz Truss said that Parliament needs to professionalise the way the House of Commons works, adding that that does not excuse crimes being committed. Well, the Conservatives will not suspend the whip from the individual who's been accused at this stage, as that would identify who he is. If he's charged, however, it's likely the whip will be suspended and the name revealed. But what can Westminster do to clean itself up? Well, joining me now is the commentator and the former editor of the Sunday Mirror, Paul Connew. Welcome to the programme, Paul. It seems like we're entering another wave of Pestminster. We saw a lot of these stories back in 2016-17, and it seems like a fresh wave of them has arrived at now. There are a number of reforms that were taken in the wake of that first wave. Have they worked?
Not really. I mean, yesterday I was very disappointed that the Speaker intervened to prevent any MPs naming the accused, the arrested MP, using parliamentary privilege. And I think that was a mistake. And I think the media have also been less than brave here, because it's widely known, his identity is widely known on social media, and there's no legal barrier to him being identified. And I think the Tory party have done themselves no favours by not withdrawing the whip and suspending him, simply on the grounds that, in fact, it would compromise his anonymity. I don't think in this case anonymity should come into it. When footballers are arrested before they're charged, they get named by the media. So I think there's been a certain cowardice there, probably a legacy of the Supreme Court ruling back in February against Bloomberg News, when a businessman got the Supreme Court to rule in his case that he should not be identified following his arrest, but before any charge was made. And I think that set a bad example, which has cowed some editors.
The rules were also changed in February 2016 on the recommendation of a cross-party committee and voted across the whole House with very few dissenters. The rules of Parliament were changed in February 2016 to say that when arrested, MPs should not be named, because before that point, they had been named. Are you suggesting that rule change was a bad move?
Some of those changes were positive. I think that was a negative example, and I think that in the court of public opinion it doesn't play very well, especially when the whole issue of integrity, honesty and the cost of living crisis is putting the focus very sharply on MPs, ministers and the trust factor.
I suppose there is the argument that this individual may not be guilty. This individual may not be charged. Would it then have been too soon for this name to be splashed across the press if indeed this is not something that becomes, that isn't charged or goes any further than this accusation?
I think the freedom of the press is very important here. And as long as the press then reported fully that whether he was named or not, that the case against him had been dropped and no charges were being levelled, I don't think that's an issue. I think transparency is very important, especially at a time of political crisis and in particular a crisis in the trust and credibility of parliamentarians. Although the Sunday Times story claiming there are about 56 MPs and ministers and shadow ministers under investigation is being denied on the scale of that, there is no doubt at all. There are a substantial number under investigation for alleged sexual harassment, bullying, etc. So again, I think transparency is all important here, because at a time like this, politicians and governments need to have public trust, and public trust at the moment is hanging by a gossamer thread.
I suppose members of Parliament have never been held in the highest of esteem across the country, but it does seem like now there has been a particular...
From the extensive scandal, of course, but they were clawing back some of the ground until the last few years, and of course Boris Johnson's own issues around Partygate has further undermined the, if you like, the collapse of trust.
I suppose we need to look at the way that Westminster works in its entirety. What is it about that place of work that seems to have a disproportionate number of individuals who have done wrong or are accused of doing wrong? Is it something to do with the way the Westminster is run, or potentially something to do with the kind of people who might want to put themselves forward to become MPs in the first place?
I think it's a mixture of both. I mean, politics is about power and ambition, and although I totally accept the vast majority of MPs are honourable, that there are an alarming percentage, a minority, but still a substantial minority, it would seem, who don't conduct themselves in the way that would be acceptable in any other industry. It's hard to think that a company executive of say a major corporation facing the accusations and following an arrest over allegations of rape and general misconduct would not be suspended. And I think it's extraordinary for the vast majority of the public, that this man, although he's been invited to stay away from Parliament, I think it needs something more than an invitation, please stay away, but be told you are suspended, the whip's withdrawn, and so therefore you're not welcome here, and you cannot do anything to do with your political role until the police investigation is concluded and a decision is taken on whether to charge or not to charge.
I suppose it's right to say at this point that the individual in question has reportedly spoken with the Speaker and confirmed that he will not be coming onto the parliamentary estate while the investigation goes
It's a voluntary
on.
thing. This shouldn't be voluntary, Tom. It should be compulsory.
So do you think that the way that the Speaker has handled this, finally, in this conversation, do you think the way that the Speaker has handled this has been wrong in its entirety? He has, after all, been acting in according to the rules of the House as voted for by the House.
Yes, but that still doesn't preclude an individual MP identifying the person using parliamentary privilege. The Speaker took the initiative. And I think, and although I'm generally an admirer of this of Speaker Hoyle, I think that was a step too far. But I also blame my own profession, journalism, for not actually taking a stronger position and ignoring what the Speaker said, ignoring the fact that the police aren't naming him, which is the Met's policy. Because they wouldn't be doing the same thing, as I said earlier, if it was a Premier League footballer who'd been arrested. Once they knew the identity and were assured the identity was correct, then I think they should have moved. But it is that Bloomberg ruling which I think has spooked certain editors. But I wonder how long this, if you like, this anonymity will last in media terms before somebody decides to pluck up the courage to identify.
Well, either that or I suppose the individual may be charged, at which point probably the floodgates will open. I suppose we may well not have that long to wait. We'll continue to watch this and follow this case with interest. But for now, Paul Connew, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Really important discussion to have there. Cheers. Well, now, turning away from the bad of Westminster to hopefully some of the good that Westminster might be able to do. Of course, as the cost of living continues to impact us all, the cost of childcare is on the minds of many parents and households in the UK. Parents now fork out an average of almost £14,000 a year per child in nursery fees. British parents face higher childcare costs as a share of household income than any other country. Well, this morning I'm delighted to speak to an MP who's recently become a parent and is campaigning to cut the cost of childcare. Saqib Bhatti is the Conservative MP for Meriden and joins me now. Welcome to the programme. What can be done in practical terms to reduce this enormous expense for parents?
Well, thanks for having me on, Tom. I mean, as a new parent, I've discovered this is a bit of a minefield when it comes to finding childcare, and the cost is so high. And when constituents and parents are talking to me, the one thing they always say is, the cost of childcare is just punitive at times. And there are a number of ways we can do it. We actually have a really strong, one of the best childcare sectors in the world, and the balance we have to achieve is to try and retain that while also trying to find measures to reduce the cost. So you can do things like increase ratios in nurseries, which is not a uncontroversial thing in itself. It's obviously a highly regulated sector. So we have a gold-plated scheme, the EYFS, which means that it's highly regulated. Childminders and care settings have to follow some of the most stringent regulations in the world. And then also, I think we can go further. I think we can look at how informal childminders and family members who can participate in childcare can be incentivised.
It's interesting looking at this sector in particular. There's an argument to say that some of the fiscal transfer that has taken place in recent years, some of the programmes to subsidise childcare to some extent may well have pushed up costs for those that do not receive the subsidy, i.e. not bringing down the cost, but just simply giving more money to pay for more. It seems like there might have been extra inflation due to government action in this centre. In this sense, it's an interesting issue because this is one where the solutions might be politically difficult, but might also be free to do.
Well, the thing is, I mean, there is a strong conservative argument to rectifying this. We, as a party, believe in the role of the family. We believe in the fact that actually, if you deregulate and you let the market make decisions, ultimately what will happen is you will get a what I call a productivity dividend. So the OECD predicts that you will get a 10% increase in GDP. But also, it goes further than that. Generally speaking, it is women and mothers who end up staying at home. I mean, that's the overarching kind of trend in our society. And by giving more flexibility and choice, and it is about flexibility and choice, it means that you can allow for a greater female participation in the workforce. You've got lots of opportunities there. And then you can start to effectively address the gender pay gap, which it starts effectively when women have to, extricate themselves from the workforce to effectively take care of the children.
Yeah, so often we talk about a gender pay gap, but it might well be better described as a motherhood pay gap, because I think I've seen a number of numbers that show that women who choose not to have children end up earning just the same or sometimes more than men. It's so interesting, actually, to look at some of the world leaders around the world, whether it's Angela Merkel, Nicola Sturgeon, Theresa May. These are individuals who chose not to have children and reached the very top of their game. It seems like there's almost a penalty to some women for having children, which seems like entirely the wrong way that society should operate.
Well, look, I mean, I know plenty of women who have children who are at the top of their game, right? So it's not a one size fits all, but certainly those women who have children are clearly, when they're taking themselves out of the workforce, and men aren't. Clearly, there is a disparity that is created, and ultimately, what I'm saying is we need more flexibility and choice. We can do that, and I'm pleased that the government is listening. They've opened up for consultation. I think the Children's Minister talked about expanding ratios to the Scottish level. But I'm also very clear on this that actually, mothers, when you speak to them, they're very cautious about the expanding of ratios because obviously they want the best quality childcare for themselves. So I think we've got a case to not just win the minds, but we've got to win the hearts as well.
Do you think the government might need to be bolder here? Of course, the ratio in England is very, very tight. The ratio of carers to children, that is, in Scotland is slightly looser, but it's nowhere near as loose as it is in, for example, Scandinavian countries, where it's a much looser ratio and they have much lower costs for childcare. And no one would suggest that Scandinavian countries have a low level of care. Might it be time potentially to explore going further than Scotland and going to the level of some of those Scandinavian countries?
Possibly, but I think at the moment, I think the minister has taken the right approach by looking at the Scottish model, which is, of course, I don't ever hear that the Scottish model of childcare is not a safe model. I actually believe that we need to look at it holistically, because if you are looking to reduce costs, you have to introduce more flexibility, you have to deregulate, so informal childminders. There are plenty of cases where, for example, family members participate in childminding, and perhaps there's a way we can look at incentivizing that as a proposition, because ultimately what we want is a good, strong, stable, safe environment for our children to be nurtured and to grow, and for it to be affordable for parents. So, sometimes it will be about women getting back into the workforce. Sometimes it will just be about having a better quality of life. Parents want to spend time with their children, on the whole, and therefore, having a better childcare provision will assist in that.
Well, you make a very, very compelling case. I was amazed, quite shocked to see that number, £13,718. That's the cost of childcare to new families. It's quite extraordinary. Let's hope that some of these ideas will be taken forward by the government. For now, Sakib Bhatti, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing. Really interesting discussion there. Well, now let's stick with the cost of living, the biggest issue facing families up and down the country, of course. The financial squeeze continues to have a big impact in Britain, with many people saying they're worried about falling into debt. With inflation hitting its 40-year high of 9%, gas, energy and electricity prices will continue to pinch the pockets of the people of Britain. So what can practically be done to ease the looming costs and crises for so many households around the country? Well, joining me now is Richard Lane, Director of External Affairs at Step Change, the largest debt charity in the UK. Welcome to the programme. I suppose this is a real genuine worry for so many people who may well be thinking about borrowing just in order to get by. What is the situation looking like in the country now?
Yeah, that's right. It's an absolutely huge issue. And actually what we're hearing from clients who are coming to Step Change is actually that they have been struggling to get through the pandemic. Many of them have seen their income reduced because of furlough, or they've had their hours reduced. They may have borrowed money to get through. And now they're coming out the other side of that and facing a perfect storm of rising costs. And people are starting to borrow more. We're seeing some of those early telltale signs. And for lots of people, they're not turning to affordable credit. They're having to turn to really high cost credit to be able to make ends meet, just to put food on the table at the moment.
And that's a real concern, because being in debt is not the best thing at the best of times, but high-cost credit, these are, I suppose, the sort of loan shark variety of lenders. That can really create a big problem. What sort of political solutions might you be looking towards that potentially would help many, many families right now?
I think there's a few things we need to see. Firstly, we need to see universal credit and other benefits uprated in line with the real rate of inflation. We saw last year, after the £20 uplift had been taken away, that was a real terms cut for millions of households. We need to see schemes like the Warm Homes discount and the winter fuel allowance expanded so that more households can access it. We also need to see local authorities make sure that the support that the central government has given them to hand out to local residents is making its way to the people who really need it. And we also need to see creditors and utility providers showing that there is real forbearance available to people, that they're not turning to bailiffs and heavy-handed enforcement action the minute that someone falls behind.
That last point, I suppose, is so very important for people. First 2 points that you raise, that's about spending money. That's about pumping more money into the system. And the crisis that everyone's facing right now is about lots of money being pumped into the system, is about those prices rising by 9%, and actually for the poorest families rising by more. Is there not a risk that if more money is pumped further into the system after all of that, that we're just going to pump up this inflationary spiral, that cash will chase prices and prices will chase cash, and we'll end up with even higher inflation as a result?
Well, I've made 2 points on that. If you look at the support that's been made available so far, if we look at how much the price cap went up in April, it went up for most households by about £900, and they were then able to access support of about £300, £350. So it didn't cover anywhere near the rise in the cost of living that people saw just on their energy bills. Secondly, this isn't just about pumping money into the system because it's nice and the right thing to do. This is actually good economic sense, because when people are financially struggling, that problem gets pushed around the economy. It gets pushed to mental health services. It gets pushed to homeless services. It gets pushed onto family breakdown, because money has a real issue on people's ability to kind of have a happy family life. So if we want to have an economic recovery from the pandemic, where people get back out, they can spend, that we're seeing security and stability for families, then actually the time is to spend that money now, in our view.
There is a big risk, though, if we're making more money available, that the value of that money is less, unless there's extra productivity in the economy. Unless people are doing more things, that money is worth less. The economy is the same size, or even, as some predictions are heading towards, getting a little bit smaller. How can we help boost productivity to try and assuage this threat? How can we get people doing more things?
Well, most of the people who come to us are in work already. And actually, one of the barriers that they have to work is the fact that they're living in poverty. They're dealing with stress and anxiety around money, which is distracting them from actually being able to kind of focus on work, focus on family, focus on studies, whatever it is that they want to do. We know that financial issues are so acutely linked to mental health problems as well. So if we can actually take away some of that pressure, that is one of the ways that we can get people more productive in the workplace. We'd also say that we're very supportive of this financial support that the government needs to make available, being very heavily targeted to those who need it the most. We've seen some broad support at the moment, but actually it is people living on the lowest incomes who are suffering the most because of inflation. So we are incredibly supportive of that being targeted to those families who need it the most.
That's a really interesting point there, and potentially with very, very targeted help, that might not have the same sort of inflationary effects that big, broad brush measures have had, particularly in the United States. Well, Richard Lane, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Director of External Affairs at Step Change, of course, the largest debt charity in the UK. Really interesting discussion there, very important topics to be talking about. That's it for the show today. Thank you for joining me. Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick and Mercy. But first, we'll have a look at the weather forecast.
Hello, good morning. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A fine start for most of us following last night's heavy rain in places. Warm sunny spells with just some showers remaining in the far northwest. We've seen some lively weather go through overnight as weather fronts cross the country from the west. High pressure is now building from the south, and so for the vast majority, actually, it's a fine morning. Sunny spells. 1 or 2 showers still possible towards the southeast for a time. Even these get out of the way. And then really showers by the afternoon will be confined to western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland where it will be cloudier and breezier. But for the vast majority, for the rest of Scotland, for England and Wales, sunny spells, light winds and feeling pleasant enough in that sunshine with temperatures reaching 23 in London, 19 in Cardiff, 20 in Glasgow, 18 in Belfast. Now, through the rest of the afternoon and into the evening, we're going to see further clear spells for a time for many, further showers for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. They die away for a time overnight, but in the south, well, our attention turns to the continent where once again some showery rain will start to move in, so that by the end of the night, actually quite a cloudy picture in the south and across central parts of the UK. 12 or 13 degrees here, 9 to 11 with clear spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Then during Friday morning, outbreaks of rain or showers for many southern parts of the country, and the threat of some intense thunderstorms just passing by the southeast, most likely staying just far enough away, but we'll keep an eye on those. And for the rest of the country, it's rain or showers moving in from the west and temperatures returning to around average for the time of year. Saturday brings with it plenty of fine weather, particularly in the south, still 1 or 2 showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland. And Sunday, I think we'll see a few more showers pushing in from the west, temperatures around average.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's 2 questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.